How ambivalent patriotism is may be gauged by the fact that no two writers have expressed it more vigorously than Kipling and Chesterton. If it were one element too, such men could not both have praised it. In reality, it contains many ingredients, of which many different blends are possible. First, there is love of home, of the place we grew up in, or the places, perhaps many, which have been our homes, and of all places, fairly near these and fairly like them. Love of old acquaintances, of familiar sights, sounds, and smells. Note that at its largest, this is, for us, a love of England, Wales, Scotland, or Ulster. Only foreigners and politicians talk about Britain. Kipling's "I do not love my empire's foes" strikes a ludicrously false note. My empire. With this love for the place, there goes a love for the way of life, for beer and tea and open fires, trains with compartments in them, and an unarmed police force, and all the rest of it. For the local dialect and a shade less, for our native language. As Chesterton says, a man's reasons for not wanting his country to be ruled by foreigners are very like his reasons for not wanting his house to be burned down, because he could not even begin to enumerate all the things he would miss. It would be hard to find any legitimate point of view from which this feeling could be condemned, as the family offers us the first step beyond self-love. So this offers us the first step beyond family selfishness. Of course, it is not pure charity. It involves love of our neighbors in the local, not of our neighbor in the dominical sense. But those who do not love the fellow villagers or fellow townsmen whom they have seen are not likely to have got very far towards loving man, whom they have not. All natural affections, including this, can become rivals to spiritual love, but they can also be preparatory imitations of it, training, so to speak, of the spiritual muscles, which grace may later put to a higher service, as women nurse dolls in childhood and later nurse children. There may come an occasion for renouncing this love. Pluck out your right eye. But you need to have an eye first. A creature which had none, which had only got so far as a photosensitive spot, would be very ill employed in meditation on that severe text. Of course, patriotism of this kind is not in the least aggressive. It asks only to be let alone. It becomes militant only to protect what it loves. In any mind which has a pennyworth of imagination, it produces a good attitude towards foreigners. How can I love my home without coming to realize that other men, no less rightly, love theirs? Once you have realized that the Frenchmen like café complete just as we like bacon and eggs, why, good luck to them and let them have it. The last thing we want is to make everywhere else just like our own home. It would not be home unless it were different. The second ingredient is a particular attitude to our country's past. I mean to that past as it lives in popular imagination, the great deeds of our ancestors. Remember Marathon. Remember Waterloo. We must be free or die, who speak the tongue that Shakespeare spoke. This past is felt both to impose an obligation and to hold out an assurance. We must not fall below the standard our fathers set us. And because we are their sons, there is good hope we shall not. This feeling has not quite such good credentials as the sheer love of home. The actual history of every country is full of shabby and even shameful doings. The heroic stories, if taken to be typical, give a false impression of it, and are often themselves open to serious historical criticism. Hence, a patriotism based on our glorious past is fair game for the debunker. As knowledge increases, it may snap and be converted into disillusioned cynicism, or may be maintained by a voluntary shutting of the eyes. But who can condemn what clearly makes many people, at many important moments, behave so much better than they could have done without its help? I think it is possible to be strengthened by the image of the past without being either deceived or puffed up. The image becomes dangerous in the precise degree to which it is mistaken or substituted for serious and systematic historical study. The stories are best when they are handed on and accepted as stories. I do not mean by this that they should be handed on as mere fictions. Some of them are, after all, true. But the emphasis should be on the tale as such, on the picture which fires the imagination, the example that strengthens the will. The schoolboy who hears them should dimly feel, though of course he cannot put it into words, that he is hearing saga. Let him be thrilled, preferably out of school, by the deeds that won the empire. But the less we mix this up with his history lessons, or mistake it for a serious analysis, worse still, a justification of imperial policy, the better. When I was a child, I had a book full of colored pictures called Our Island Story. The title has always seemed to me to strike exactly the right note. The book did not look at all like a textbook either. What does seem to me poisonous? What breeds a type of patriotism that is pernicious if it lasts, but not likely to last long in an educated adult, is the perfectly serious indoctrination of the young in knowably false or biased history, the heroic legend drably disguised as textbook fact. With this creeps in the tacit assumption that other nations have not equally their heroes, perhaps even the belief, surely it is very bad biology, that we can literally inherit a tradition. And these almost inevitably lead on to a third thing that is sometimes called patriotism. This third thing is not a sentiment, but a belief, a firm, even prosaic belief that our own nation, in sober fact, has long been and still is markedly superior to all others. I once ventured to say to an old clergyman who was voicing this sort of patriotism, "But sir, aren't we told that every people thinks its own men the bravest and its own women the fairest in the world?" He replied with total gravity. He could not have been graver if he had been saying the creed at the altar. Yes, but in England it's true. To be sure, this conviction had not made my friend, God rest his soul, a villain. Only an extremely lovable old ass. It can, however, produce asses that kick and bite. On the lunatic fringe, it may shade off into that popular racialism which Christianity and science equally forbid. This brings us to the fourth ingredient. If our nation is really so much better than others, it may be held to have either the duties or the rights of a superior being towards them. In the 19th century, the English became very conscious of such duties, the white man's burden. What we called natives were our wards, and we their self-appointed guardians. This was not all hypocrisy. We did do them some good, but our habit of talking as if England's motives for acquiring an empire, or any youngster's motives for seeking a job in the Indian civil service, had been mainly altruistic, nauseated the world. And yet this showed the sense of superiority working at its best. Some nations who have also felt it have stressed the rights, not the duties. To them, some foreigners were so bad that one had the right to exterminate them. Others fitted only to be hewers of wood and drawers of water to the chosen people had better be made to get on with their hewing and drawing. Dogs know your betters. I am far from suggesting that the two attitudes are on the same level, but both are fatal. Both demand that the area in which they operate should grow wider still and wider, and both have about them this sure mark of evil. Only by being terrible do they avoid being comic. If there were no broken treaties with redskins, no extermination of the Tasmanians, no gas chambers, and no Belsen, no Amritsar, black and tans, or apartheid, the pomposity of both would be roaring fast. Finally, we reach the stage where patriotism in its demoniac form unconsciously denies itself. Chesterton picked on two lines from Kipling as the perfect example. It was unfair to Kipling, who knew wonderfully, for so homeless, a man what the love of home can mean. But the lines in isolation can be taken to sum up the thing. They run, if England was what England seems, how quick we'd drop her. But she ain't. Love never spoke that way. It is like loving your children only if they're good, your wife only while she keeps her looks, your husband only so long as he is famous and successful. No man, said one of the Greeks, loves his city because it is great, but because it is his. A man who really loves his country will love her in her ruin and degeneration. England, with all thy faults, I love thee still. She will be to him a poor thing, but mine own. He may think her good and great when she is not, because he loves her. The delusion is up to a point pardonable. But Kipling's soldier reverses. He loves her because he thinks her good, and great loves her on her merits. She is a fine-going concern, and it gratifies his pride to be in it. How if she ceased to be such? The answer is plainly given. How quick we'd drop her. When the ship begins to sink, he will leave her. Thus that kind of patriotism, which sets off with the greatest swagger of drums and banners, actually sets off on the road that can lead to Vichy. And this is a phenomenon which will meet us again. When the natural loves become lawless, they do not merely do harm to other loves. They themselves cease to be the loves they were to be loves at all. Patriotism has, then, many faces. Those who would reject it entirely do not seem to have considered what will certainly has already begun to step into its place. For a long time yet, or perhaps forever, nations will live in danger. Rulers must somehow nerve their subjects to defend them, or at least to prepare for their defense. Where the sentiment of patriotism has been destroyed, this can be done only by presenting every international conflict in a purely ethical light. If people will spend neither sway nor blood for their country, they must be made to feel that they are spending them for justice, or civilization, or humanity. This is a step down, not up. Patriotic sentiment did not, of course, need to disregard ethics. Good men needed to be convinced that their country's cause was just, but it was still their country's cause, not the cause of justice as such. The difference seems to me important. I may, without self-righteousness or hypocrisy, think it just to defend my house by force against a burglar. But if I start pretending that I blacked his eye purely on moral grounds, wholly indifferent to the fact that the house in question was mine, I become insufferable. The pretense that when England's cause is just, we are on England's side, as some neutral Don Quixote might be for that reason alone, is equally spurious, and nonsense draws evil after it. If our country's cause is the cause of God, wars must be wars of annihilation. A false transcendence is given to things which are very much of this world. The glory of the old sentiment was that while it could steel men to the utmost endeavor, it still knew itself to be a sentiment. Wars could be heroic without pretending to be holy wars. The hero's death was not confused with the martyr's. And delightfully, the same sentiment which could be so serious in a rearguard action could also in peacetime take itself as lightly as all happy loves often do. It could laugh at itself. Our older patriotic songs cannot be sung without a twinkle in the eye. Later ones sound more like hymns. Give me the British Grenadiers with a tow row, row, row any day rather than Land of Hope and Glory. It will be noticed that the sort of love I have been describing and all its ingredients can be for something other than a country, for a school, a regiment, a great family, or a class. All the same criticisms will still apply. It can also be felt for bodies that claim more than a natural affection, for a church or, alas, a party in a church, or for a religious order. This terrible subject would require a book to itself. Here it will be enough to say that the heavenly society is also an earthly society. Our merely natural patriotism towards the latter can very easily borrow the transcendent claims of the former and use them to justify the most abominable actions. If ever the book which I am not going to write is written, it must be the full confession by Christendom of Christendom's specific contribution to the sum of human cruelty and treachery. Large areas of the world will not hear us till we have publicly disowned much of our past. Why should they?